Merhaba herkese. Yeni bir video ile karşınızdayız. Bugün değerli arkadaşım Konstantinos Xypolytos'la beraberiz. Kendisi Koç Üniversitesi'nde doktorasını yeni tamamladı. Askeri tarihçi. Onunla bugün Maduro olayını, The Maduro Incident'ı konuşacağız. Bu konuda hani aynı zamanda bir tarihçinin gözünden de değerlenmek hoş olacak diye düşündük. Bir de çok fazla tartışılıyor, konuşuluyor. Biz biraz daha farklı bir yerden bakabileceğimizi düşündüğümüzden böyle bir video yapmak istedik. Kendisi şu an İbn Haldun Üniversitesi'nde doktor öğretim üyesi olarak görev yapıyor. Bu video tabii İngilizce olacak çünkü kendisi İngilizce biliyor. Durumumuz var. O yüzden bundan sonrasında İngilizce devam edeceğiz.
Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela.
Hello, Konstantinos. Thank you for participating in this.
It's my pleasure to be here and thank you for that introduction. It's lovely to be here, being part of the series.
Thank you. Yeah, this is, in January 3rd, U.S. Army take captive of Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and it was a very swift situation. And the media and all newspapers are writing about this. Also in YouTube, in televisions, there are a lot of commentaries about the situation. But I want to start with this maybe basic question. Yani, is this a huge thing? Yani, is this a really huge thing, or is it just a part of the show that Trump administration is doing? Because in especially our generation knows Trump in a lot of TV shows. He had some kind of show. You are fired.
The Apprentice, yes.
Yeah, The Apprentice, and he was, and in his presidency, especially in the second term, I think he is also using this kind of character that he used in the television shows. So he's saying some people you are fired. He's saying some people actually you are fired. He says also he says some people, some presidents of another countries, he's just commenting on their wives, commenting on their clothes, etc. So they are very much into also his defense. The Minister of Defense changed the name of the ministry and he nailed it into the wall of the ministry building. So they are always showing off something, and they also said that they will bring peace into the world. They tried in Russia-Ukraine case, it was a failure. They tried it in Israel-Palestine situation. It was a failure too. So, but they put it as a success into the world, and also the other politicians in other countries tries to try to get close to him. So they always approve his moves as a success. But I am very suspicious about this. So I want to start with this question: Is this really a huge thing?
So this is a huge topic. Let me start by saying that January 3rd is starting to become a milestone for every Trump administration, because let me remind you that it was January 3rd when Donald Trump decided to conduct the airstrike that killed General Qasem Soleimani a few years ago. Yeah. Some people joke that January 3rd is Trump's international law cheating day. That's when he gets to do all of these things. But I do agree with you that there seems to be this element of theatricality within the Trump administration, permeating every aspect of it since he took office in 2016 and up until this day. I remember, I think it was on Substack, I was reading somebody, you have to forgive me, I cannot remember for the life of me who it was, said something about Trump's own very understanding of policy and how everything works is within the TV format, like an episode of The Apprentice. Something starts, but by the end of it, he needs to be in charge, and he needs to be the man. He needs to be in charge of the cameras and all of that. So I think, considering everything, and this is a very multi-layered event that has taken place from a perspective of international law, from a perspective of pure military operations, absolutely this fits the way it is presented with the way this administration has chosen to present itself to the world, present its perceived successes to the world. Now, regarding your question about whether this being a big event, whether this is actually huge, does it merit something? I'm going to tell you something that most historians who happen to be involved in military history will tell you.
Too soon to say about.
Too soon to say. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's something that we often say. We tend not to get into the counterfactuals. Part of our training has led us to think and act like that. But I think it is important and significant in itself for a variety of issues, which we will get into in a bit. But until now, and so far, I would say that a lot of things need to transpire. I don't think the smoke has cleared yet in this sense. So, yes, absolutely, this is a significant event. Is this the first time that this has taken place? No, actually, there is precedent for this. The United States has conducted similar operations in the past, the most notable of which is the extraction of Panama's president, Noriega, back in '89, when they removed him and took him to the US to stand trial. We're not talking about regime change in the same way that we saw it in Libya or Iraq or Afghanistan. We did not see boots on the ground yet. Who knows? But absolutely there is precedent for this. But I would say that this event merits attention in itself so far. But we will see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask also, I want to get into the details of the operation. The operation is an impossible operation in a way. Yani, as I said before to you in our talks, yani, if we would watch an American movie about this kind of operation, a rational, some general would possibly say that this is impossible. This is an impossible work. We cannot do it, President. Like that, they would say, I think. And in a movie, maybe it will be possible, but in real world, I think, yani, there is an army of Venezuela, and in their capital, some helicopters are going through, and they say also we don't know any videos of actual escalations, but they say there has been some shots, and then we get him to the New York. And I want to say that yani, also, especially after this Ukraine-Russian escalations and war, I started to read some military experts in Twitter or other media, and also some open source intelligence experts, and they also mostly, yani, especially some of them are bipartisan commentators mostly, but also even they say that this is some kind of proof of the American army's superiority against all the rivals. In also, for example, in Turkish military experts, they are mostly nationalist ones, and they are mostly some kind of trying to be distanced against the Western ideas or Western commands or Western goals, let's say. They also say that this is a huge thing. This shows the superiority of American army. We should look at them. We should learn from them with looking this operation in detail. So I want to ask you about some operational details right now. Yani, is this possible in a way? Yani, how can it be done?
Well, it did take place, so there's your proof right there. It is possible. I mean, if we have any prospective governments watching this thinking, is this possible? Yes, it is possible. But I think with everything we say, we need to qualify this, because there's quite a lot of moving parts over here. Now, there has been a huge debate ever since this operation has taken place regarding the legality of what just took place. And we will talk about this later on. During this interview, but I think what everybody can agree on is that whether you think that there's nothing wrong with this, legally speaking, or whether you think that this was a genuine violation of sovereignty, everybody can agree that this was a very impressive operation in the way that it was carried out. Now, of course, what we saw was the result of a continuous effort that has been taking place for this, from what we know from the American Ministry of Defense, since late summer 2025. American presence in the Caribbean had been increasing since then. You see more and more vessels and assets of the United States Navy, mostly, showing up there. Quite a lot of work has been done by the Trump administration in their efforts to curtail or stop the drug trafficking that had been taking place. And they also came under scrutiny some months ago for the attack against vessels that were allegedly carrying narcotics, where the Americans would just blow them out of the water like that. But from what we know, this operation has been long in planning. There was a human intelligence element within Maduro's circle, so there was somebody there that the Americans used information from. There was a huge surveillance effort by all kinds of technology utilized by the United States Armed Forces in surveying Maduro, in creating a pattern of his daily life, where he eats, where he sleeps, how that rotation worked. And of course, also from the early reports by the American Secretary from Defense, we know that American forces recreated the compound in which Maduro lived and trained in the snatch operation, in the very same way that the Americans conducted the raid against Osama bin Laden back in 2011, Operation Neptune Spear, I think. I'm not very good with military operations names, although the military loves naming their operations under, giving them these big names. So this is not something that happened overnight. This was months in planning. There was a gradual escalation, more and more assets, and it was a multi-layered operation. The amount of manpower involved in this and technology involved in this, it included special forces, which in terms of this operation, when push came to shove, this was the meat and potatoes of the whole business. It's them actually going in and getting Maduro out.
The famous or maybe infamous Delta Force.
Yes.
Yeah.
As well as special operations air assets, so helicopters. I read that it's the same people basically that do this sort of thing. And we also know that prior to the actual operation where Delta Force went in, a salvo of missiles was launched against targets in Venezuela. Most of these targets would probably be air defense systems, and they were neutralized before the special forces went in. So it's not just a case of a bunch of special forces soldiers hopping on their helicopters and flying over. It was the Navy. We're talking about aircraft carriers. We're talking about frigates. We're talking about stealth bombers. All of them work in sync, neutralizing level of defense all the way down until the point they reach the compound and they snatch Maduro. So I would say that American capability is right there for you to see. The money's on the screen. It would be very difficult for any other country in the world to be able to emulate all of that. Not simply because of the massive volume of the equipment needed and the experience that you would need. This is a huge commitment. A lot of vessels in the area. Normally, small countries, medium countries. I mean, even Britain struggles to maintain their overseas commitments with their current fleet. Let alone conduct a complicated operation like this. At the same time, I think we should qualify this even further, because we know and we're told that the Americans did not have anybody killed from their own forces, although I think half a dozen of their special forces personnel came under fire and then were later taken to hospitals in the continental United States, and one of their helicopters came under heavy fire. And the Americans have conducted raids in the past, and they were casualties. They were not as smooth, you would say, as this one. For example...
And you expect casualties.
You do. I mean, there's the example of Yemen in 2017, where a Marine was killed in one of these operations. Why am I saying this? Everything looks great with these operations until it doesn't. Things can go south very, very quickly, and there should be some kind of preparation or an element of acceptance of casualties in this sense, which, again, that would be terrible, but this is a high-risk operation, and it could very easily go in a very different way. Not because of wrong planning or lack of resources, just plainly because things happen in war, and you cannot control them all the time. Ultimately, this is a calculated risk that the American government struggled with, and ultimately they took the risk, and they thought that, this is worth the effort, this is worth the risk, we are willing to do this. And on some level, Maduro also knew about this, because we also know that for the past month he was expecting something like this. His security was taking him around every day.
Before going you in there, I want to make my question a little bit clear, because when I first heard about the situation, the incident, especially I was talking with Alper about the case, and I said that there should be someone in Venezuelan government who, not someone, maybe a group or a party, let's say, they were willing to give Maduro to US in this kind of operation. This is I think okay, I'm not a military expert, but we know some events also, and there are a lot of countries, they are increasing their defense payments, in a way, defense budgets, so they are always looking for different ways to defend themselves. So Venezuelan government were not asleep, I think, at that time, so they should have done something to defend themselves in a way. So I mean every military situation has some political background, but in this case I think there should be can you guess some kind of ratio of how much this was a military thing, it was about warfare, how much it was about a political negotiation with the Venezuelan government?
I see.
Yeah.
I am not sure, and we're not sure at this point, about the level of collusion between the two sides. I am sure that some kind of conversation must have taken place. Now, when it comes to elements within the Venezuelan armed forces that were willing to give up Maduro, that I'm not sure about. I would not be surprised. The country has been plagued by factionalism in its armed forces and nepotism for quite a while. But it's one thing to say that there's factionalism, it's quite another thing to say that these people that conspire against him have the ability to do something like this. I think it requires something more concrete for them to actually gather up the courage and say that, ultimately we will do this. However, on the other hand, what we also know from the announcements of the American Department of Defense is that about northwards of 30 people that were killed defending Maduro were not Venezuelans, but in fact they were Cuban counterintelligence. And we also know for a fact that it is Cuban counterintelligence that was taking care of Maduro's security for quite a while. And that tells you a lot about Maduro and his regime as well. If you reach the point where you trust your security to others instead of your own countrymen, that tells you something about the confidence that you have in your own armed forces and how safe you feel with them as well. So At this stage, I would not go as far as to say that this was an inside job, this was theater, he was looking for an honorable way out because he could not surrender himself to the Americans. But I would not put factionalism and cracks within their own system as a factor that did not affect this. Absolutely, it affected this.
Last night, on the order of the President of the United States, and in support of a request from the Department of Justice, the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice two indicted persons, Nicolas and Cecilia Maduro.
Okay, then let's continue with the situation of Venezuelan army. Yani because especially with this operation, they cannot defend their president, and they cannot couldn't defend their capital. So, do they exist? So, an existing army can experience such an humiliating situation in a way. What do you think about, especially about your experience in military history? What can you say about them?
So, what we've seen with the Venezuelan armed forces is something that is quite typical when it comes to authoritarian regimes. The problem with authoritarian regimes, and in particular their armed forces, is that they are geared towards a different purpose. And their main purpose is to keep the people who rule in power. So it's not necessarily their job to defend the country in the conventional sense as we understand it. They're more they're geared towards domestic suppression. And this is something that we've also seen in the past. America has experienced this in the past. The most common example, and it gave away to a whole era and doctrines of how to fight wars, and wars like this would be the two invasions of Iraq in the 90s, First and Second Gulf War, where, if you remember, at the time Saddam had one of the biggest standing armies in the world. He had a lot of state-of-the-art technology at the time purchased by the Soviet Union and leftovers, and everybody was very worried, how is this going to plan out? And they did not function, at least in terms of fighting the enemy, in the way people expected. Even Americans were surprised because they were expecting more resistance from them. I know this anecdote. I mean, I remember this anecdote where General Schwarzkopf, who was in charge of the First Gulf War, immediately after the grand operation took place, he asked for a report about how many casualties they had. And at the time, the American military, just for the purposes of contingency, had about 100,000 body bags available for American soldiers. And American casualties by the end of the land campaign amounted to a couple of tens, maybe. And some of them were due to friendly fire. I mean, more Americans shot other Americans in that war than Iraq is actually shooting Americans. It is later on in the Second Gulf War, when America moves on with the occupation, that American forces start taking losses. But this gives you an idea of the Americans are going into war. We have 100,000 body bags available if anything happens. It's the scale of the casualties that they're willing to take. And of course, the Iraqi regime did not perform as it was expected, and nor did the Venezuelan armed forces, for the same reason. These are people that are not promoted based on merit. They're not promoted because they're good at their job or they're smart. They're promoted because they're loyal. And in most cases, somebody who is loyal does not necessarily mean that they're on top of their career, because in jobs like this, as a military professional, you need to be able to ask questions, not supersede civilian authorities, but there needs to be a certain dialogue in between the two. It's not simply a case of following orders. And the one country that has done this very well is the United States. The United States in many ways serves as the example of civil-military relations. There's the very famous book by Samuel Huntington called The Soldier and the State. Lays this out. I don't agree with, personally. I don't agree with a lot of his theories. There's a new book that came out very recently by Korishek, the soldier in the state. In some ways, the title is a homage to Huntington, but she talks about this. Civilian authorities and the military junta interact, which is very important, especially in today's America, given the current administration's relationship with its top generals. The other thing that I think it's important to discuss when it comes to the aspect of the Venezuelan armed forces, as you asked, is the capability that was given to them allegedly by possessing very high-end Russian anti-aircraft systems. Now, in many ways, and this is a conversation that has been happening in Turkey for some time, because you also have this conversation in your political discourse with the S-400s and before that with the Patriot missiles.
I think Venezuela government has S-300s, right?
They had, I think,
They
because
had,
whatever they had was probably blown up by Tomahawk missiles, and just having a weapons platform does not mean that it will operate exactly in the way that you expect it to. You need to have qualified and trained people able to do this, and even then, there are so many things that could go wrong. Now, if you go back to what I said before, that there's an increased American presence in the Caribbean since the late summer, if you're a radar operator in Venezuela and you're tracking all of this, the question should be, when should I press the button to shoot something down? And there's always things happening and happening and happening. By the time the American operation takes place, time has passed so fast. At the same time, a lot of these systems were neutralized by guided missiles. This is not what we call a fire and forget weapon. These are very smart weapons that are guided all the way through until they reach their intended destination. So a lot of these systems were blown up before they could even intercept whatever the Americans were doing. And the other thing with these systems is that in many ways it is also a prestige weapon. You don't necessarily have it for what it can do, but you also have it for the sake of having it. To have anti-ballistic missiles means something. You cannot have a lot of it because it is quite expensive and you need to train a lot of people, and if you lose part of it, then it's very difficult to replace.
So Venezuela has no advantage like North Korea, right?
I mean, I don't think that the weapon itself gives you an advantage. I think there's a couple of things that need to come together and put the puzzle forward. So I think this is a lesson for other regimes and also democracies that weapon systems themselves do not guarantee deterrence. I mean, speaking of lessons, this whole idea of how do we do this kind of operation like you asked before, or how do we protect against this kind of operation, would probably be talked about in many halls of power as we speak. And I think many people would be sitting down watching this, what's happening in Venezuela, thinking, okay, we need to do something about this. We thought that we could get away with things like this, or how do we protect against things like this? I think the main recipient of this message would probably be Russia, and you would probably have Vladimir Putin looking at the screen at what took place in Venezuela and sort of, angrily, pointing at the screen, then pointing at his generals. Because, I mean, if you ask me, I think this is the sort of thing that he would try to do until the operation, his a couple-day operation in Ukraine went pear-shaped, and now we're in this war, which, if it continues on like this, it would have lasted longer than the Great Patriotic War of the Soviets versus the Nazis. It would have taken the Russians longer, pardon, the Soviets. It would have taken the Russians longer to defeat Ukraine and its forces and Zelensky than it did for them to defeat the Nazis. So weapon platforms by themselves, I don't think that they are as potent as people expect them to be in their minds. And the other thing I should probably mention here, which I think is quite important, is that in some ways, America has a tarnished reputation when it comes to its military ability. I mean, if you recall, the last time we hear about large military operations in the United States was Afghanistan. The inglorious exit from Afghanistan, and nothing to show for 20 years over there, and millions of people dying and all of the suffering and refugees and stuff. So in some ways, this comes as America's way of saying, you know, we're still here, don't mess with us, we're still relevant, we can do things like this. But again, to go back to the original point, the weapons themselves are not the most important part. I think in most cases, if you ask people, if you ask military professionals, they will probably tell you that it is the personnel, it is the professionals, it is the people that actually take care of this. And I think they're right in this regard. Finally, the last thing that you need to consider, that ultimately what you have here is the clash against the mightiest war machine the planet has ever seen, against a country with long-standing military and political problems for the last 20 years. So it's not the case of the United States fighting a peer or a near-peer rival. This is going after a country that you could say is doing the best it can, but ultimately, realistically speaking, is really no match for the might of the United States.
Yeah, also failing itself. Also, Venezuela was failing itself before U.S. army.
I think you can make that point, and you would be in the right. I don't think it would be too much to say that. Yes.
Okay, Abi, let's go into some thing more globally to look at this operation. This operation unfolded discussions about the international law, which the operation was clearly against it. So after this thing came, a lot of commentators look at the U.S. Courage to declare against international law in this kind of case, and also they mostly criticize that, especially European leaders who are looking Ukraine-Russia case as a thing that Russia acts against international law, but in this case they didn't criticize US clearly or objectively, let's say. So some commentators said that this is some kind of hypocrisy that the West has interimly, let's say. But also, I want your comments on that situation also. But when we go into the global thing, I want you to comment on maybe what this represents for Russia and China. We can say that they are the biggest rivals of US right now in the world. So, what do you think about it?
Well, there's two things I can talk about here. The first thing is what happens in Venezuela and how what happened in Venezuela reflects with broader patterns around the world. Most countries around the world, ever since the time of the pandemic, have been struggling with financial issues, in particular when it comes to inflation. One of the things that Donald Trump has made very clear in his speeches is his willingness to take over Venezuela's oil. If he does that, and provided oil production can start ramping up, this is going to bring the price of oil down, and this is very good for the American consumer because they have been suffering under high inflation, and that's going to ease the situation a little bit. And in some ways, this is going to resonate with his supporters. At the same time, another narrative that is propagated by the White House is illegal migration. So the other thing that Trump is going to come out of this and say is, look, I'm doing something for this. I'm going straight into the cause of this, although it's not really Venezuelans that sort of show up in the United States. Although it is important to say here that in the last 10 years, more than a third of Venezuela's population has migrated into nearby countries. But again, like we said before, there is this theatricality throughout the Trump administration, and this is something that they can get and package and sell to their supporters as a victory. Another part, of course, it's the illegal drug trade. Again, it is not Venezuela where narcotics are manufactured. Venezuela serves more, and even in this sense, as a much more limited value as a way station towards the United States. So I think if you ask me again, it's very soon to say this, but Trump is going to kill many birds with this one stone. He's trying to, in his mind, this is something that, he does, and everything sort of falls into the right direction. Now, when it comes to how this reflects towards American rivals, in particular Russia and China, I think this is a double-edged sword for them, because on the one hand, in terms of international law, it gives them the ability to say, who are you to judge us? You're doing exactly the same thing. And this kind of, whether you want to call it Western exceptionalism or, the Western Bloc's tendency to observe international laws and norms, not all successfully always, because keep in mind, we talked about the raid against Osama bin Laden. There was no state of war between the United States and Pakistan when that took place. There was no state of war between Yemen proper or the United States, yet there was a raid there. There's places the United States intervenes all the time without actually having legal justification. However, in most cases, what you would expect, and this goes way back, is that at least there's a veneer of legality in whatever the United States is trying to do. Usually they would say that, we're not going after the country, we're going after a particular organization, whether it's terrorist group, or they would say something like, it's not just us, we have people that joined us as well. May I remind you of the coalition of the willing that George Bush tried to put together in 2003 for Iraq, when he got Tony Blair to help him out with this. Of course, the other European partners were not 100% with this. And the incessant struggle of NATO and its members to try to optimize their campaign in Afghanistan, when everybody had doubts, when nobody really wanted to send their militaries over there to get shot at. But like I said, there's a tendency, even what America is doing would not be understood under international law as strictly legal, at least try to appear as if, we're observing or we're trying to be legal. Here it's the opposite case. But again, this is not an exception. They have done all kinds of operations in the United States, So on the one hand, there is precedent. At the same time, yes, it is a blatant disregard for international law. So on the rival powers, be whether it's China and Russia, they would see this and they would say, you have no right to judge us from your high horse. But on the same time, I think both of them are seething at the ability that the United States possesses. Russia tried to do what the United States did successfully. They failed. Now they're bogged down into a very costly war. China has aspirations for Taiwan. I don't see China being able to carry out anything like that when it comes to Taiwan. On some level, I think also that makes no sense. It's not about removing one person from Taiwan. It's about, bringing the renegade state back into China proper, as it has been official Chinese policy.
Also, it seems, would you accept me or not, I don't know, but for Russia and China, they are not matched to US in preparing their allies also. Because, for example, US and NATO prepared Ukraine, US mostly prepared Taiwan army, and they are a bit strong. Ukraine has proved herself a strong army, but Venezuela was getting some help from Russia and China, maybe, but there was not such an army to defend themselves. Would you agree?
I do agree with this. Ultimately, it goes back to this idea that Russia and China don't really have allies in the same way that the United States has allies. There are disagreements between NATO countries, but they do come together, they do invest money together, they do develop technologies and weapons together, they do get deployed together. Sometimes casualties are disproportionate, and sometimes not everybody pays their fair share according to what the American president or what NATO guidelines dictate. But these are not the same allies like Russia has allies or China has allies. We live into the August of the post-war world built by the United States. This is the world of the United Nations, of the International Monetary Fund, of the World Bank, of the World Trade Organization. These are all things that were set up after the Second World War and in many ways cement American domination throughout the planet. And to have all of these things, you need to have a certain level of compliance. And they did get that from their allies and from NATO and from all these organizations. China and Russia are not on that stage. They're not looking to dominate the world. Mm-hmm. They don't need that kind of muscle to help them through this kind of domination. And if you decide to send in military advisors or to send in equipment to fund your allies, this is a significant investment over long, long periods of time. There's this tendency, and we talk about this quite often, both in war studies and in political science, especially when it comes to defense reviews. People love to talk about military modernization and military modernization. We're going to get a whole new military and all of that. And we also interpret things like that in the past historical horizon. We say that, this army modernization is successful. For example, we talk about the German military after the First World War and before the Second World War, and how much great they were in the beginning of the Second World War, overrunning the Low Countries in France, Norway, taking over Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and all of that. But I think this whole idea of military modernization, having a proper military, you need to be able to stretch it more. And you need to qualify the reason why you're doing this modernization. It's not a case that Russia would come in and modernize the Venezuelan military because it wanted to promote Russian interests in the region by deployments or by overseas commitments and stuff like that. It's not the same. I mean, NATO countries patrol the whole world. You have navies deployed all the time in the Pacific, in the Indian, Atlantic Oceans. You have special forces operating sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, most of which we don't even know about. Russia and China don't do things like that. There's no need for them to do things like that. So there's no need for them to build armies like that in whatever allies they have. Because it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money, it's a huge payoff. In some cases it is a risk, because even if you do all of these things, somehow it might not work, and then the whole thing just, gets binned. Yeah. So why would you do it? You don't. It doesn't make sense. I was trained as a political scientist because I swapped into history, and one of the things our professors used to say to us was that people are not stupid, they're not crazy, they're very rational, and they reach their conclusions based on their circumstances. It's those circumstances that you need to understand and able to understand their thinking. It is a very easy, and I would also say a lazy thing to say that somebody is stupid or they don't know what they're doing. People in positions of power most of the time know very well what is happening. And they take decisions based on those circumstances.
Yeah, this is a good time to go into Europe, for example, because a lot of people criticize Europe not to act against U.S. operation in Venezuela, as same as Ukraine, as I said before. So I want to underline it, because can one expect Europe compare Ukraine situation and Venezuela and act the same into these two other things? I don't think so. Would you agree with me? I don't know.
I mean, you can draw parallels here in this sense. What Russia says, and Russia has been saying this for quite a while, both through their words and their actions, they say, we don't want NATO to come here, this is our backyard, this is very important for us, okay? And I don't doubt Vladimir Putin when he says that. I think he genuinely means it. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the most clear parallel you can draw with the United States is the Monroe Doctrine. It's the idea that the Western Hemisphere is our business. It's American business. Everybody else stay out. Now, the Monroe Doctrine, the way it was conceived back in the 19th century, was against European imperialism. But I think what you can do very easily, and this administration has certainly done this, is that you can take the next logical step, which says that not only are the Europeans not allowed to come and mess with our backyard, we should be able to do what we like. And you can see the crescendo of this happening during the Cold War. You had, most famously, and one of the greatest failures in interventionist foreign policy by the United States, the Bay of Pigs invasion during the Kennedy administration. Dozens of regime changes all over Central, South America throughout the Cold War. You have Nicaragua, you have Chile. I mean, So again, that is a parallel you can also draw. In both cases, international law or the perspective of these interventions are quite shaky, because neither Russia nor the United States should be able legally to do this. But again, I think the parallels stop there. America is not looking to denazify Venezuela. I mean, Trump talks about, you know, getting rid of Maduro and the left and the left taking over, but the left in the United States is not the left that is ruling Venezuela. That's something entirely different. It's not like Putin's rhetoric about denazifying Ukraine. The operation did produce casualties on the Venezuelan side, and from what we know, civilians were also harmed by what the Americans did, but it's nowhere near the carnage and destruction that the Russian army has inflicted on Ukraine, deliberately targeting civilians. I'm not talking about being collateral damage to a military operation. I'm talking about deliberately targeting them.
Also, it's not just a moral thing, or not a thing just related to law, international law, because this is also the sense of danger. So Ukraine is in the right side of the east side of the Europe. The imminent danger is near, and also there is a fully mobilized army going into some other country, and this one is okay. This is some kind of military. Yeah, this includes warfare again, but this is not a war in Venezuela, in South America, right?
Yes, we can talk about, you know, what is war. I mean, let me just say that, you know, what war is as a definition has been in discourse, both, I would say primarily in academia, because in some ways it is way more important, but also in politics. Politically speaking, you wouldn't call this war. You would call it an operation, something very surgical. But escalation. But the military and the politicians, they love epithets like that because they sound clean and efficient. But, you know, in reality, these things are often not. Let me also say that this is not the first time this happened in Venezuela. They tried to get rid of Maduro before. It wasn't the Americans. It was disgruntled Venezuelans this time, with the help of mercenaries, in a very shady situation a couple of years ago. People called it stupid Bay of Pigs, because somehow it was in a bigger failure than Bay of Pigs with, you know, Cuba. But despite the fact that America did commit significant resources in trying to do this with Maduro, I really don't see American boots on the ground in Venezuela in the same way that we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think this is something that Trump really wants to avoid.
Yeah, I think so too.
And this is something that is going to be very crucial in the future. Okay, you got rid of Maduro. What now? Are you going to get somebody compliant that you can do business with? What if somebody comes and you cannot really negotiate with, and, you know, then we're back in square one? What are you going to do then? Are you going to try to abduct them too?
Yeah.
A military operation in itself does not mean anything unless there is a clear political goal which it serves at the end. And as of now, what I would say is that I don't really see the clear political goal here. Okay, you got rid of Maduro, but what next?
Yeah.
This is very important. This is not something that Donald Trump or anybody for that matter could answer.
Yeah. Also, maybe you have seen it in Economist. There was a piece on the oil production. To increase the oil production to the world economy needs, they need 10 years, maybe more, and they need $183 billion to invest in Venezuela. And this is the 2 times of US global investment. And they cannot do it swiftly in a short time. So
no.
This is also just a saying, just a political, I think, promise to the American people.
You're absolutely right. These kinds of things take long-term commitments, in which cases it's not about Donald Trump or his administration. They take years or decades sometimes to come to fruition. This is something that we've seen time and time again. It is this inherent disconnect between military operations and political objectives. there are many ideas about why this is happening. Some people say that we have become so enamored with technology, basically the idea that we could do something like this. Well, we should just do it and see what happens. And that distracts from the political objective, which is, okay, what happens next? Some people say that, well, we cannot do anything else, so, we might as well do this. We have to do something. I think it's a combination of multiple factors. But again, I don't really see how this is going to play out. I think this would be the bet for the American administration to see how this is going to play out in the future. Personally, what I find most surprising about this situation, and I think about this almost every day, it struck me at how secret this was kept for a couple of reasons. There's leaks in every American administration, obviously, and you often hear things that, they're about to happen or things that they want to happen. This is the one time, and this administration in particular, you could argue that their president, being the man that he is not exactly what we would call somebody who can keep a secret. So the fact that he was able to waltz through all kinds of speeches, all kinds of press conferences, and never, spit out a word and keep it such a closely guarded secret genuinely surprised me.
Also, they had some Telegram groups.
Exactly,
yeah.
And there's the leaks from the Telegram groups that came before with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah.
This is not a bulletproof administration when it comes to letting things be known. But somehow they kept it secret, and it happens. It surprises you. It is not common, but it happens.
Okay, thank you, Konstantinos.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here.
It was very informative. But if you want to add some other remarks, final remarks for this conversation, you can say, or else we can finish it here.
The one thing I think would be worth mentioning is that, and this reflects not just for the events that took place in Venezuela, but all kinds of American as well as global commitments. When you do things like this, you mentioned the Ukrainian army and how they are battle worthy, or they've proven battle worthy after support with the United States. Well, this process started at 2014 after Russia took control of Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk.
Yeah.
It took almost a decade to build an army. George Kennan, the American diplomat and very good Sovietologist, if you want to call it that, although I think the man would probably reject that title. When, at the very beginning of the Cold War, he was talking with Truman back in Washington, and he was telling him about Stalin and everything that's taken place. And one of the things that Kennan says, also the author of the famous long telegram published in Foreign Affairs, and he starts the policy of containment, basically saying that, the Soviet Union is doing things, we should, go there and contain them, make sure they don't spread. One of the things he also says is that we should stop thinking like mechanics and we should start thinking like gardeners. So it's not a case of the buzi is bust, so I go in the engine and I change it and I'm done.
Yeah.
It's about planting the seed, and the seed takes time, and I'm not going to be the gardener one day. Some other administration is going to come in. They need to make sure that they take care of the garden. They need to make sure that they take care of the flowers and of the seeds. Because if they don't, the whole thing is going to go off and you're going to have nothing to show for this. And to do these things, to conduct this kind of policy, you need to have broad political understanding of objectives of what the country wants to do in the world. Yeah. It is not about what kind of plane you have or what missile you have. Can we agree as a country what priorities are? And I think what is clear in the United States, although you could replicate this in many other countries as well, is that the country has an identity crisis. Trump and the people who support him represent one kind of ideology, one kind of way of seeing the world, of seeing things, compared to the traditional way of seeing the things. People might say to me, we talk about these things, but ultimately military force, how are they different? Somehow when Obama bombs, it's fine, and when Trump bombs, it's not. No. America is retreating from the world. And half of America is happy about that, and the other half is not. when you have a situation like that in any country, it can be about anything. When people, the political class, the civil society cannot come together to agree on a few basic things of how things should go, you cannot agree on policies like that. And there's no point in talking about equipment and modernization or commitments or anything like that. This is the same crisis that permeates the European Union. This is why the European Union has such a lukewarm response to all kinds of things. On some level, it cannot act in the way that it wants because it does have the power to. In the same way that there is a force in the European Union that pushes for centralization and another that pushes for decentralization, the same thing happens in other countries as well. And until that is taken care of, until we can all be on the same page, then you can have and implement policies like this over a long period of time. I don't know how much possible that is in today's world, because not only politics has been democratized today in ways that would be inconceivable 100 years ago, in many ways participation in political life to all walks of life, to all people in many different countries has been opened unprecedentedly. You have people from social classes and from backgrounds in politics today in their respective countries that would never be able to go anywhere near that 100 years ago, and they bring their own experiences and their own ideas into that. And that brings this pluralism out, which is good, I suppose, when you talk about having different voices in politics, but ultimately when it comes to carrying out a specific policy that requires long-term planning, could be counterproductive. So I don't know if this kind of politics, grand politics, the 19th century, our interests are in this or that kind of politics, is really feasible today. Not just in the United States, in most countries around the world.
Yeah,
Probably in authoritarian countries you might be more able and willing to do something like this. So take the example for China and Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
But even then, there's changes in people at the topmost levels, and they also bring change with them. So again, how feasible are these policies in today's world where, I mean, Venezuela happened a few days ago, and we're not even talking about Venezuela anymore. Everybody's talking about Greenland now. Now he wants to invade Greenland, or whatever it is that he wants to do with Greenland. Tomorrow, who knows? Attention spans and news circles have slimmed down into the smallest possible time frame, and you know, as long as it is re-election that the political class has its mind, they do not fully commit to the idea of preserving the status quo that they came from, or the values that they supported, or who they are in the world. As long as all they care about is pleasing the electorate, well, you have to switch sides all the time, and you have to promise whatever, and you have to play the game.
Yeah, it's a good topic for another video, maybe.
That's another video. Yeah, that's
public
another
politics
video.
And military politics.
Yeah,
and maybe.
And I see behind the camera Alper laughing, so maybe he would like to contribute next time.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Arkadaşlar teşekkürler izlediğiniz için. Yeni videolarla inşallah karşınızda olacağız. Beğenmeyi ve abone olmayı unutmayın. Bay bay.
Good night. Good night. Happy New Year.
And we have done that. It was a rough section.
Kimisi oyuna kızar, kimisi pop müzik çalar. Vıdı vıdıcı kafa bozar. Ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor. Kimisi kıskançlık yapar, kimisi paraya tapar, kimi de yanlış yola sapar. Ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor. Canını sen sıkma koçum, kafana hiç takma oğlum, durduramazsın sen bunu. Ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor. Ağzı olan konuşuyor. Canını sen sıkma koçum, kafana hiç takma oğlum, durduramazsın sen bunu. Ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor, ağzı olan konuşuyor.